What is going on, guys? Today's video, as you can tell by the title, is going to be talking about intermittent fasting and why it can lead to binge eating disorders. I am somebody who practices intermittent fasting absolutely every single day, but I do think that people overstate some of the benefits of intermittent fasting and don't focus on the dangers and pitfalls that it may possess. This is how the video is going to be structured. First, we're going to talk about what intermittent fasting is, my personal experience with it, binge eating disorders and their relation to intermittent fasting, and then how I learned to mitigate that. So, what is intermittent fasting? Well, it's a loose term, but it's often understood as a period of fasting and eating throughout the day or week. Most often, people opt to have their eating window to be 8 hours a day and a fasting window of about 16 hours a day. Now, this might sound extreme, but half of those 16 hours are spent sleeping. So realistically, you're only aware of the 8 or 9 hours that you actually fast. Now, you can do intermittent fasting in a variety of ways, but for the purpose of this video, let's focus to a 16-8 ratio, which means you fast for 16 hours and then you have a period or window of opportunity to eat within an 8-hour time frame. So let's say you elect to skip breakfast. Your first meal could be around 3 p.m. if you go to bed at around 11 p.m. So that gives you about an 8-hour feeding window. So from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m, you eat the macros, the calories, the fats, the proteins that you prefer. And then once you wake up, be it at 7 or 8, you fast until 3 p.m. again, give or take an hour. So this is my experience with intermittent fasting. I tried eating my first meal at around 2 or 3, and to be honest, it was horrible. I felt super tired, super drained. I felt lethargic. I couldn't really move. I had to force myself to exercise, force myself to be productive. Life wasn't very fun. Also, my mentality started being more depressed, and I did feel like food was having more of a control over my life. Now, when I did break my fast at around 2 or 3 p.m, I noticed that I could not stop eating. No matter if I had a high fat diet, a low fat diet, high carb, loads of protein, if I ate a particular oil like coconut oil to break my fast first, or I took a particular supplement, nothing really helped. I would end up stuffing my face for a complete 8 hours until I could really not move anymore, and I felt really bad to the point where I was often throwing up and I couldn't control myself. By the end of my eating window, so around 10 or 11ish, I would have eaten roughly 3 times the amount of calories that I need for the day. The worst thing was, even when I was really full, I was still very hungry and had a very large appetite to continue eating even though I felt sick. Now, fasting like this really hurt my relationship to food. I am not alone in this experience. What does the science say about this? In a recent study at the University of Texas, they fed rats a restricted diet over a 12-week period. This included a period of fasting and a period of refeeding. 30 days after the fasting and refeeding cycles were over, the rats were still experiencing severe binge eating and eating absolutely everything in their sight. The hypothesis is that they began, as much as rats can, to have a different relationship with food. Now, it is important to note that they didn't do so in an 18:6 ratio. Instead, they did periods of 6 days without food and then 1 day of refeeding. Therefore, the claim shouldn't be taken as strongly as some might suggest. However, this is often my question when people claim intermittent fasting has so many benefits. Increase in human growth hormone, decrease in insulin, and a variety of new forms of gene expression. Because intermittent fasting is a relatively new scientific area, most of the scientific literature is based on animals. Rats are often exposed to times that cannot be transferred realistically to human beings. A 16-hour fast for a rat is completely different in proportion to a human being fasting. So similarly to the Texas University experiment, we cannot absolutely conclude that intermittent fasting causes binge eating, but if we conclude that, then we also can't conclude that intermittent fasting has all the benefits that it claims to have. So we should take this study into consideration when trying to understand the benefits of intermittent fasting. However, there have been some human studies on the effects of intermittent fasting. In a 5-year study on bulimia and binge eating in relation to fasting, they said that fasting for weight loss highly predicts future eating disorders such as bulimia, rather than other dietary behaviors such as simple caloric restriction. This is not surprising to find, because if you're trying to lose weight and you're starving yourself, there's a good possibility that you will start binge eating once that period is over. In a study by the University Hospital of South Manchester, they found that healthy women undergoing intermittent fasting felt extended amounts of hunger, worse mood, irritability, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, and also, and the most important one when it relates to binge eating, fear or loss of control during feeding periods. Now, whenever people argue for intermittent fasting, they often argue for a ketogenic or high-fat diet. This is because of the idea that you will become more fat adapted and you will use fat more efficiently as a fuel source rather than carbohydrate. If you're not fat adapted, then you will feel a lot of the fatigue, a lot of the mood swings until you become more metabolically efficient. The problem with this is that not everybody likes a high-fat diet. Not everybody functions efficiently off a high-fat diet, and as I mentioned before, it can often lead to binge eating. So I mentioned earlier that I still practice intermittent fasting. So how do I do it if I love carbs, I have binge eating tendencies, and I still want to have a healthy relationship with food and not feel tired and lethargic? The way I intermittent fast without having the urge to binge eat is doing it absolutely the other way around. So I eat my breakfast in the morning and I have a slightly larger lunch and then a few snacks in between and a few snacks after lunch. After that, I stop eating at around 4:30 p.m. So when I eat breakfast, I straight away feel the energy from the food that I am using. Remember, carbohydrates are the preferred fuel source for your body to use rather than fat. So when I eat breakfast, I feel energy straight away from the food that I eat. Then when I come to lunch, I eat food and that powers me towards the end of the day, as well as some snacks in between. The reason I prefer this, aside from the binge eating, which of course is important, is the fact that I start my fast at its easiest period. If you've just finished eating, the first 4 or 5 hours aren't really that difficult, and realistically the first 8-hour fasting window is really easy. The more difficult period is the last 8 hours where you feel really lethargic and tired. That's when I sleep, so I don't need to think about how hungry I am and how lethargic I am. I just sleep, and then when I wake up, I can have breakfast again. This way, when I intermittent fast, I don't have to substitute it with coffee, with other artificial stimulants like many other people do. Also, saves time on cooking for dinner. There are some cons to this because dinner time is a very social event, but that's a topic for a different video. Now, the question is, does intermittent fasting work the same way if you start eating breakfast and lunch and you stop eating at around 3 or 4:30 p.m? In a study published by the Cell Metabolism Journal, they studied intermittent fasting individuals who stopped eating at 3 p.m. They all noted all the benefits that intermittent fasting claims to have in that group. So if you fast the other way around, like I do, you will receive the same amount of intermittent fasting benefits as you would if you did it the other way around. Plus, I would argue you would feel much better. Now, it's important to note that there are many scientific studies that argue there are no absolute benefits from intermittent fasting when compared to calorically restricting diets. There's a lot of scientific information that argues for and against, which would make this video very, very long. However, it's important to understand that regardless of the scientific studies that are published, regardless of what doctor says what, or what rat binge ate himself to death, or what people like myself and other YouTubers say, is how you feel. How you feel is the best indicator of whether a certain lifestyle or a certain nutritional plan is beneficial. If you feel like 3, 4, 5 meals a day benefit you metabolically, physically, emotionally, psychologically, then you should do that. If you feel like intermittent fasting is better for you, whether it be restricting yourself in the morning or restricting yourself later in the day, do what you think is best for your mind, body, and soul. If you believe that after an extended amount of time, a certain diet doesn't work for you, or your current diet doesn't work for you, then I think it's quite sensible to try something else to see whether you can improve your quality of life. So remember guys, be conscious of your cravings if you're doing intermittent fasting. Be careful where they might develop, because you could go into binge eating, or you could really love the intermittent fasting lifestyle like I do. Thank you very much for listening guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you do like the video, please subscribe and like it. Also hit the bell notification icon to get constant updates when I post a video. Boom! Never fucking works. I don't know how people do it.